AI has gotten into the public conscience very recently and in an increasingly fast pace because of the amazingly rapid introduction of generative AI into our environment. I think I heard the other day that OpenAI is the fastest adopted consumer product in the history of mankind, right? And so it leapt into our public conscious and understanding.
Welcome to the Retailgentic Podcast, where we explore the intersection of retail, e-commerce, and AI agents, which we call Retailgentic. Our mission is simple. We are shining a bright light on the new Agentic AI shopping megatrend, which will disrupt the trillion-dollar digital retail market. The stakes are high. Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Perplexity, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Anthropic are all fighting to be the consumer AI shopping agent winner. There are going to be some tough decisions for online brands and retailers to make. What happens to checkouts? How should payments work? Should you continue to invest in retail media networks? What does the world look like when over half of your traffic is not from humans, but from AI agents? These existential questions are the tip of the iceberg. On this podcast, we're talking to industry experts, analysts, and influencers to get answers to these questions, identify trends, and best practices. This is Retailgentic, your podcast partner in navigating our AI shopping agent future. And now here's your host, Scot Wingo.
Welcome to the Retailgentic Podcast. Today, my guest is Stu Solomon. He is the CEO of Human Security. Right now, you're probably wondering, hey, I wonder why Scot has on someone from a cybersecurity company. Isn't this podcast about agentic commerce? It's right there in the title, Retailgentic. What's going on? Well, it turns out Human's focus is measuring agentic, non-agentic bot, and human activity, understanding their various intents, and either blocking or allowing their activity, not only at a bot level, but at a very granular level. If you're like me, that sentence generates a lot of questions, and we're going to get into pretty much all of them on this podcast. I learned a massive amount about bad agent behavior, good agent behavior, various intent signals, and Stu shares some really interesting data about what they're seeing historically and where he thinks this is all going. I hope you enjoy the conversation and learn as much as I did. Welcome to this episode of Retailgentic. I am excited to welcome Stu Solomon, CEO of Human and fellow North Carolinian we just discovered. So that's kind of fun. I'm in Raleigh, you're in Charlotte. Stu, welcome to the podcast.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely excited to do it. How long have you been in the Charlotte area?
So I moved down here in 2006 and originally with Bank of America many moons ago, as most Charlatans have done, and stayed ever since.
Yeah, we get that B of A influx. Once you've been here for about 5 years, you're basically a North Carolinian.
I feel like at this point I'm definitely a native.
We have so many incoming that the OGs are swamped. Well, cool. Let's start a little bit more about you. So we now know you were at Bank of America and Human. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks. So I'm actually a military guy by trade, U.S. Air Force officer, and actually still serving in the Delaware Air National Guard, of all things for a North Carolinian.
That's a fun weekend trip right there.
It is a quick jaunt up the highway, the old U.S. Airways route up to Philadelphia, and enjoying a opportunity there to I actually command the entire Air National Guard for Delaware. So that's kind of my little side hustle, and I made my way, just like most folks in Charlotte, through banking, particularly on the cybersecurity side of the world. Ultimately, got into the venture capital space in the cybersecurity space and built and sold a number of different companies from both venture capital and private equity over the years. Most recently, part of a wonderful transaction to MasterCard. And came over to Human in 2004, where I've been the CEO since January of last year.
In your Air Force days, to the extent you can share whatever, I don't want any national secrets or anything. which I know you would not say, but so we know you have leadership, because you're running what must be a pretty big operation in your current role there. But did you go as an aviator, or were you more like ground ops? Were you in cybersecurity and always kind of had a interest in that from that perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started out on active duty. I graduated from the Air Force Academy as a Russian history major. And so what would a Russian history major with a Bachelor of Science degree do? I became a supply and logistics officer. I did get to do a little bit of flying, but I got into really interesting technical expeditionary logistics, figuring out where spare parts needed to go all over the world for the fighters and bombers of our fleet during the war period in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then I left active duty in 2005 and joined the Air National Guard. At that point, I was just entering into banking. And so the cybersecurity parts of my life on the banking side became really interesting to the military and vice versa. And then they just became interwoven over the years.
And is that how you ended up at Human?
So ultimately, I guess in theory, that's true. I knew many of the board members and investors at Human from various other endeavors that I had done over the years, and it just became a serendipitous scenario where we just came together in the right time and right place.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of military folks are in the back office side of the retail. So once you get into fulfillment centers, you tend to meet a lot of veterans in that role, and it's because of the supply chain part. Whenever the all of our various armed branches have to be able to move so many things around so quickly into different theaters and everything that suddenly standing up a distribution center in Iowa is not that challenging. It's like if this was in Beirut, it would be a lot harder. But over here in Iowa, Des Moines, it's like not that hard.
Well, and ironically enough, and we obviously didn't talk about this ahead of time, but my very first job after active duty, I moved to Newcastle, Delaware, right outside of Wilmington, Delaware, where Amazon's largest distribution center on the East Coast was back in 2005. That was my first job. So I was actually running the night shift, building out their distribution center at the time.
It's on the tip of my tongue. What's their 3-letter acronym for that one?
I don't remember off the top of my head. It's been so many years.
I know they have like DFW 1 through 8 now, and the Delaware one, it'll have to come to me.
Well, at the time, I believe there were only 3. So there was Newcastle, Delaware, there was Louisville, Kentucky, and I think there was Henderson, Nevada, and that was it.
Yeah, Kentucky's CVG. It's usually after their closest airport. And now they have like CVG 1 through I think 10 or something. They have like a ton there because that's where their air operation is. And I had a co-founder that was in the Army, and I don't know if you guys do it, but he was always like he would never say supply chain. He always called it boots, bullets, and beans.
There you go.
Because you gotta move people, you gotta move food. Because once you move people, you gotta have food, and all the fighting branches are not very effective if you don't have the bullets. So
usually how that works. That's right.
Cool. So you know a little bit about retail, having worked for. Did you work for Amazon proper? Or?
No, this was Amazon proper. At the time, there was nothing else.
Yeah, got it.
Wish I had kept all those stock options.
Yeah, that was a good investment there. And then when you went into Human, we now know you're CEO. Like, what was your progression inside of Human?
So I came in as the CEO.
Okay, so just like jumped right to the top. Didn't start at the mailroom, skipped the mailroom, went right to the top.
Skipped the mailroom on this one. That's right. But over the years, as after I left banking, I moved over into the venture capital world and kind of built up some startups, and then moved into later stage private equity companies. And I've kind of run that gamut of everything from a general counsel to a president of the business, to a COO of a business, to the CTO of a business. And so this was kind of the next step on that journey.
So give us an idea of what Human does and a little bit of feel for the scale and scope of your operations there.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about that because I think that Human is probably one of the largest and most significant companies that most people have never heard of, but they actually are protected by and influenced by on a daily basis. If you do any kind of interaction between your digital environment and a computer or a phone, you probably are touched and protected by Human in some way. So there are really materially 2 sides of our business. There's a media side of our business, and there's an enterprise security side of the business, but both of them are predicated on the same singular focus, which is this historical notion that machine or bot-based activity is used at scale to be able to manipulate and create fraud throughout that entire kind of customer journey from the time that a digital ad is first conceived in any kind of environment, in on a website, in a podcast, in a connected TV or connected device scenario, when a advertising scenario occurs where digital ad content is created and then it's married to a publisher. There is all kinds of potential fraudulent activity that occurs both pre and post the bidding on that space that places a digital ad in your environment in the first place. As that fraud begins to occur, it gets scaled by automated or bot-based activity. Human sits in the middle of that scenario to be able to start to build a layer of visibility into the potential for manipulation or fraudulent scenarios associated with digital ad content. Then once that digital ad content gets placed, you now put it in front of the demographic that you expected to put it in front of, and there's all kinds of potentially fraudulent manipulation, fraudulent clicking, fraudulent redirection of different scenarios. Human is sitting in the middle of all of those scenarios as well to be able to ensure the sanctity of that relationship between the digital ad content and the intended audience. Now, the next step, let's say either a human or a machine, because it could be either, appropriately accesses that digital ad content. What does it do? It builds some level of brand affinity and probably takes you to a website if you've clicked on it and you want to go and you want to log in. And now at that point that you want to log in, humans sitting in the middle of that as well to make sure that it's not fraudulent or malicious activity that's authenticating. You get into that website. Next thing you want to do is you want to go shopping or you want to set up an account, you want to do something. We're sitting in the middle of that as well, right, to protect you all the way through to your checkout. So that entire kind of digital journey from ad placement all the way through transactional behavior, we have different components of our capabilities that help to identify potentially fraudulent or malicious behaviors and, or more importantly, to protect good stuff and to be able to allow for that journey to continue. And to give you perspective on the scale, we're seeing over 20 trillion digital interactions on a weekly basis. So a few trillion times a day, in tenths of a millisecond, we have to make decisions of good or bad, yes or no, right or wrong. And historically, these things have been predicated on this idea that it was a very binary scenario where a human meant good and a bot meant bad. And that's simply not the case anymore. Now, in a more modern world, bots are actually outpacing humans on the internet, and most of them are doing things we want them to be doing. So that's kind of the human journey and where we are right now.
When you say trillions, that's a big scale. How many, again, to the extent you're comfortable disclosing anything, give us an idea for how many customers you have, what segments they're in. Like one kind of, for dummies question, I'm the dummy, I don't know your business, is who pays for all this? So like, is DoubleClick paying you? Is the advertiser, the publisher? There's like a lot of people, there's like 18 constituents in the digital ad world, and enterprise is probably easier. I'm sure the enterprise is paying you. And like, so who pays you? How many customers do you have? And like, how do you think of certain segments that they're in?
Yeah, I think a good way to think about it is we have many hundreds of clients across the globe. And those clients will tend to fall into two camps, as you said, on the kind of enterprise security side. So when you get to the point where you're getting challenged and going through an authentication at a website, it's going to be the brands, the retailers. We tend to focus very heavily on the people that would want to have a website and transact with you in some way. And that could be on the services front or it could be on the retail front. On the media side of our business, we tend to historically have built products that would really focus on the platforms where advertisers and agencies come together with publishers. So think DSPs as an example, but not exclusively so. We also have a suite of products that are attractive to advertisers, brands, and to publishers as well.
And then I assume private company, or are you more like private equity?
We are a later stage private equity held company and have wonderful financial sponsors. Interestingly enough, because the company has come together through an amalgamation of multiple companies being brought together on the singular platform over the years, I still have early stage venture capitalists who are still invested with us and much later stage private equity invested in us as well. Our primary financial sponsor is Goldman Sachs.
Oh, good. Yeah, I know them well. I've been on those boards where I had a company, ChannelVisor, where I had my Series Seed and then like my Series D people on there, and like the D people are like wanting to talk about shaving off a point of margin or something like this like really esoteric thing, and then the A guys are like, you should try these 800 ideas, and like and it's like, whoa, all right, a lot of feedback from all over the place. It's a fun management trick to get them aligned on like what's important for the business.
We literally have people that had been A-round investors all the way through late-stage private equity. The other thing that's really unique in our environment, and actually I think the coolest part about our business, is that I have people that have a cybersecurity lens and focus. And then I have individuals who have both investors and board members who have more of a media business focus. So I actually have this really interesting dichotomy of not just different economic scenarios and aggressiveness, as you've articulated, but also those that just simply have different world lenses on the economy as well. So it's a pretty cool discussion.
So one of the reasons we reached out to you guys to be on the pod is you've started to put out some really cool research and data around what you're seeing with agents. So say a little bit about that. So I kind of reading the tea leaves of the reports, it seems like you guys are sitting there as this layer and you're seeing a lot of activity going on, and you've been doing some reporting. Is it specific to purchases, digital ads, or is it all encompassing across your whole sphere of things? So where's the data come from, I guess, is the overarching question. And give us an update of, when I first started seeing your data, the numbers were big, and then they've just gotten even like more bigger. And so at first they were kind of shocking, and now they're just like mind exploding at shocking. So tell us a little bit about why did you guys start publishing this? Where's the data come from, and some of the data that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we talked about a little bit earlier, this notion of 20 trillion digital interactions in and of itself just sounds like completely ridiculous. But what's more important is when you start to peel the onion back into these big, frankly, societal changing activities that we're seeing today, particularly with Agentics. What the data is starting to tell us, and I'll go into more detail on this in a second, is that it's actually a today problem, not a tomorrow problem. The rate of adoption and the pace of adoption and the change in the dynamic of what we're seeing in the data is leading us to believe that there's a rather significant movement, even quicker than we thought, into agentic behaviors. So I'll go into some specifics, which I think are very relevant. So obviously, when you look at all that data, those 20 trillion interactions, let's say a subset of that is going to be bot-based activity, and a subset of that is going to be human activity. Within that subset of bot activity, there's actually a significantly increasing presence of agentic bot activity. And we'll kind of talk about what that means as we go through the conversation. But I think the place to start with is to think about a couple of key concepts. The first concept is we're at an inflection point right now where not just we at Human with our rather large install base, but in general, the internet is very rapidly hitting an inflection point where there's more machine or bot-based traffic than there is human-based traffic. So we hit about a 50-50 split or inflection point this year, but there are many studies out there that are pretty clear that it looks like upwards of 80% of all internet traffic is actually going to be machine or bot-based activity within the next 10 years. So we've already hit the inflection point, and it's only going to increase. Now, of that traffic, a portion of that is obviously agentic in nature. The agentic piece is the thing that we've seen some really unique observable scenarios around. So just since we started looking over the last couple of months, let's call it over the last 4 months, we've seen over a 1,300% increase in the amount of traffic that's specifically agentic in nature. So it's proliferating is the bottom line. But let's go a little bit deeper on it. It's fascinating to see that over time, not only is the amount of traffic that's either attributable to agentic traffic or to generative AI traffic is increasing every month, and it's increasing rapidly, but the mix of what makes up that traffic that we're seeing is starting to change and become more diversified. So generative AI traffic that was attributable, for instance, primarily to research activity going on using ChatGPT as an example as the predominant amount back even 2 months ago. If we're now starting to see that there's more traffic, and even more of that traffic is now diversified. We're actually seeing more Perplexity, and we're seeing more of other generative AI browsing scenarios that are starting to occur. So you start to see a diversity of that traffic that's leaping off the page right now. What's really interesting, though, is that even within that, as that continues to diversify, we're seeing an uptick in specific observable agentic activity. So agents going in and logging in. 3% of all the traffic that we see right now that's agentic is actually login activity that's authorized in an agentic way. Another 6% of that we're seeing is actually related to clicking on pages and websites. So these behaviors that are indicative of leading to ultimately an outcome that we fully expect, which is what comes next, the transaction. And all this is observable in traffic that we're just seeing within our install base today. Imagine what it's going to look like 3 or 6 months from now.
If we cross this year, it seems like we should get to 80% faster than 10 years. I don't know how long it took us, I guess, since the inception of the internet to get here, but I bet the trend tells us it's not going to take 10 years. Do you think that 10 years is, I think you're going to probably say you would take the under on that?
Yeah, I think you would take the under on it, but I think one thing that becomes a natural limiter to that is human desire to accept that. So as I alluded to earlier, there's always been this presumption that if you're a bot, you're bad, and if you're a human, you're good. Humans are the natural limiter that add friction into their environments and controls to stop that from happening as quickly because they haven't made that mental leap yet. So I think that there's a natural limiter there. I think the other component to it is that we simply haven't built all of the protocols to be able to determine not just how do you establish visibility and how do you back up that visibility with trust, but then the next step is what authority and autonomy do you give these agents to act with? I think as we build more of the protocols to be able to build that trust layer with the ability to have the authority and autonomy assigned to an agent with verifiable credentials, it'll continue to kind of exponentially create a hockey stick of adoption. So I think it'll probably be a little bit slower over the next couple of maybe year or two as things really settle in from a technical control perspective, and then it's just going to leap off the page.
So it seems like you have a taxonomy that is human and then bot has two sub flavors, non-agentic and agentic. Is that kind of a way of thinking about this taxonomy in your, okay.
Yeah.
And then, so we're at 50-50 or we've passed it, human and then the totality of the two types of bots. Within the bot category, how do you tell if it's agentic or not agentic? I don't want any secrets, but yeah. So, just I'll caveat that so I don't have to always say it, but yeah.
Not at all. I appreciate that. I would go back really quickly and say, and even with human or bot, it could be good or bad. And
yeah, there's like a whole nother.
It could be a good human or a bad human. It could be the right human or the wrong human. It could be a good bot or a bad bot. It could be the right bot or the wrong bot. And my dog is making a guest appearance. So
guests are welcome.
You can't stop.
Is that a Weimaraner?
She is a Great Dane.
Okay.
And she's larger than I am, so we'll let her keep going.
I have no, I can't tell her size. If I saw her legs, I would know the difference.
150 pounds of love. So, but as you kind of contemplate those notions, there is an element of intent that becomes really important in the conversation and important to establishing that trust as well. Is the bot acting or is the human acting to create an outcome that you expect or want it to create? And what is it trying to do becomes part of that matrix as well as you think through it. With that in mind, there's a couple of ways to start to think about an agent acting in the right way. As I mentioned a moment ago, an autonomous or an agent actually is an autonomous activity with some level of verifiable credential, with some level of authorization, with some level of accountability, and with some level of learning over time that starts to emulate behaviors and anticipate behaviors that you would want it to do, that you've authorized it to do, that you expect it to do, and that you can have accountability on the outcome once it's created. So all of those different elements have both technical aspects to them and behavioral aspects to them that help you to be able to triangulate and create a position of trust at the point in time in which it starts to act, and then in the persistent trust as it acts, and then trust in the outcome.
So in my world, we'll just pick on ChatGPT, but Perplexity and all the others have similar kind of setups, right? So in my world, you've got ChatGPT. They have a bot, GPT bot, that is used, a crawler that is used to crawl sites for training and other purposes. They have another one that builds their web index. They have yet another one that kind of like goes and checks prices at retailers in near real time. And then they have the thing that was previously called Operator that is now called Agent, and it has two modes where it can operate in a virtual machine, server based, or it can live in your browser. Are all those agent or bot? I guess they're all bot, but can you distinguish on your side, or you're just more looking at intent for how you look at things?
No. So we can distinguish on our side, and you made a really important distinction as well in your question, which is there's going to be a browser-based scenario, and then there's also an API or MCP scenario. So there's automated connections that are programmed, and then there's also the behavior within your browser environment as well. Both of those are two different flavors of ways that you could start to understand and triangulate on that trust factor that I mentioned a moment ago. But those are two separate scenarios based on the way that you expect it or want it to act. So whether it's pulling in pricing information, or whether it's automating a workflow, or whether it's connecting the dots between a clear text prompt and an outcome, or increasingly, if it's one agent talking to another agent, both representing humans that aren't even in the middle of the transaction at this point.
So I imagine in your world, you're seeing all this traffic and other signals, these fact patterns, and you're having to, in your real time, kind of come up with a decision of, okay, you use all that information, you're trying to put together the stream of that to get an intent, and that's how you're kind of judging these things as things go along. So you don't have you don't have perfect information. You're having to constantly figure that stuff out. Is that kind of like the scale of the problem? At the scale of 20 trillions, you're doing that.
Yeah, I would actually look at it as a multi-phased approach. So you add different elements of friction at different components to it. So it's really a triangulation of intent, behavior, infrastructure. And then I would also add that verifiable credential component to it as well. So maybe it's more of a box than a triangulation, but it's taking all of these different signals, wrapping them together, and going down the path of ensuring that you can trust that thing to do that thing at that time.
And then let's just repeat this number because it is the big one. So 1,300% increase. And can you look at that and segment it in some way to attribute it to something? You mentioned a couple of them, right? You talked about a couple, but say more about that.
At the highest level, we could start to break it down into generative AI kind of use cases, particularly around research. But then there's also indexing, authorized scraping as an example, but I think that's almost a negative connotation and not meant to be. It's authorized discovery of information and taking that information and feeding it into these models or feeding it into these outputs. Then the next piece after that you would start to see is automation, workflow management scenarios, that leading to an ability. We're seeing much smaller but increasing amounts of traffic specific to automated login activity on behalf of a human via an agent. Then the next component after that is website navigation via an agent. So imagine a scenario of go to this box, click here to be able to create a drop-down menu. When you get to the drop-down menu, select a thing. Those are automated steps that a human would normally have to navigate to be able to get to a buying decision.
The human's probably navigating a workflow of some kind. Yeah. Be it enterprise or a consumer purchase or something.
That's right. But now the agent is doing that for them. And we're actually seeing that behavior in increasing amounts, leading to ultimately we're actually starting to see actual agentic checkouts.
That's all we talk about in my world. And let's talk about that a little bit. So, in my world, and I'm coming from, the user, and you're kind of this layer in there. which is important. But in my world, it's been a very interesting year because we've had all these standards announced, right? So we had this agent to agent protocol, and Visa and MasterCard have their own. There's the payment people have like a bazillion of these, and then we had Google come out and they did AP2, and then now we have the new one from OpenAI ChatGPT, which is ACP, Agentic Commerce Protocol, and it's kind of married with the checkout that they rolled out. Do you guys interact at that layer? Because it's almost like how the data. You probably have to understand these standards because signals coming in with, like, I remember the Google one has this little manifest associated with it, every little thing, and that are you in this layer that can see that, and that's like the manifest. You say, show me your manifest. It's like a passport control kind of thing, and it does, and you're like, okay, you're good. Do you guys get involved at kind of that protocol layer of these agentic frameworks?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked the question. If, as you well know, because you're familiar with the protocols, I was basically quoting Google's a moment ago with verifiable credentials going into authentic, authorized, and accountable. Look, choose your protocol. It doesn't really matter. But the point is all of them go back to that notion of verifiable and authorized before you can even get to the accountability. We play in those first two steps. So regardless of the protocol, by understanding and identifying the agent, creating a trust layer on that agent, and being able to pull back to that intent component, you could start to get into the authorized and the authorized components in particular.
Let's talk about bad bots. In my world, the things we typically are looking for are bad credit cards, people using us to inject bad credit cards, and then another layer would be denial of service kind of attacks. Then we have some various script spoofing. Now we have prompt spoofing or whatever that's called, and those types of things. So that's the bad behaviors we're most tuned into. And then there's always someone trying to get even underneath all that and get to some underlying employee data or God forbid, customer credit card, which is the big honeypot, which is largely protected by the PCI side, which is kind of old school now. And now we have these tokenized card systems that seem to be very robust on that side. It's always interesting. Most of the big things that are happening now come from the point of sale, the older point of sale systems, but that's a digression.
I'm smiling because that's where I actually got my start in the cyber.
B of A, you know all this stuff better than I do. So is that the kind of bad bot behavior, or this is totally different bad bot behavior we're seeing?
You nailed it. It's exactly. So when I talk about the enterprise side of our business, starting really with helping to identify and potentially prevent malicious redirect scenarios, and getting into client-side protections at the browser level, leading to things like CAPTCHA scenarios. So how do you look at CAPTCHA or CAPTCHA-less ability to make sure that there's not a bot manipulation at the point of authentication? Therefore, we've spent a ton of time really working on things like account takeover or credential stuffing scenarios that would lead to that fraudulent login in the first place. That's where we put a significant amount of our technical friction into the process. And that's where we first introduce it.
And we don't like CAPTCHAs because it decreases signups and logins. So we like security, but we don't want anything to slow the money flow. So you're a nice solution.
Exactly right. And then when you get to the other side of it, are they using a stolen or compromised credential or credit card? Are they once you've authenticated, are you demonstrating behaviors that are not indicative of a well-intended human who has all the rights after authentication occurs, leading to a transaction? These are all the things, both pre and post authentication, that we would do from a behavioral anomaly perspective or from a technical perspective before that authentication.
Got it. And are you seeing agents do these things?
That's an interesting question.
The agents are on the Stu naughty list.
What I would say is we're seeing more of the abuse right now, and I think it's just indicative of the volume of traffic we're seeing. We're seeing a significant amount of very concerted effort to spoof where you're coming from, particularly in the generative space. So, very concerted efforts to really focus on looking like you are an appropriate generative AI capability that you're interfacing with and presenting yourself that way to websites or to individuals, and you're simply not. Of our observables, I think over a small period of time, we saw like 1 in 18 scenarios that were specifically generative or purported to be generative AI just simply weren't. And the numbers were outrageously worse for the larger functions, like one in 6 ChatGPT observances that we had, or purported to be ChatGPT, were actually spoofed by bad guys. So you're seeing it a lot on the generative side. When you get into the agentic side, I think that it's inevitable. Look, automated workflow is inevitable in these scenarios, but we just haven't seen a ton of that yet.
So I kind of wonder. So my guess of what's going on here is, and this actually is a question I was going to ask anyway. So I'll just ask the question, and then I'll tie these together. We frequently, again, we're involved in this other side. So we help people optimize, people that want to be involved in agentic commerce. And they're kind of like, I want ChatGPT and Perplexity to have my whole catalog. I'm Google already has it. I am totally fine with that. I'm not going to give them any of my, my customer data or anything like that or whatever. And certainly not sales rank or anything, but I want them to have my catalog. The catalog kind of like almost wants to be free in my world because it generates sales. So catalog out, sales in. So everyone's kind of incented to do that. But then they'll come to us and we have this whole framework, and then we'll start going through the framework, and then we'll look, and they're actually just blocking all the suite of bots that are going to get it in there. So we're like, let's start there. So that's kind of where we always start. Like, let's look at your infrastructure and make sure you're not just blocking one of these bots, because it is a long list now. Because it used to be Google bot, you're good, right? And then Bing bot or whatever one's called. And now like each of them may have 3 or 4. Like Perplexity has 3 or 4, and so on and so forth. So I imagine what's happening is there's some, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. It's like some entrepreneur that's trying to build a shoe pricing engine, which is like one of these really aggressive categories, because of these drops they do and everything. And, I'll pick on Nike, and Nike is, got a white list. They're not on the white list. And therefore they're trying to say to you, hey, Stu, I'm ChatGPT. I'm on the white list. And human is kind of saying, I don't think you are. Is that kind of like the situation that we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of subsets to that point for sure, which is, maybe you want to get discovered or indexed in a particular LLM because you want your pricing to be available and your product to surface through the model. But then you also want to make sure that there's a connection between your data and your pricing and what's presented. So the sanctity of that relationship actually has to maintain from a source sanctity perspective. The next one is that maybe you want to be discoverable from the next bastion of SEO, right? So from search engine optimization, as now moved into agentic discovery, you want to be discoverable, but you have to index the right way with the right kind of keywords and the right discoverability to even be found in the first place so that you do surface. But then on the flip side of it, that there are plenty of other companies that we're seeing that their data is their value. And so on the flip side, you have to monetize that in a controlled fashion, whether it's intellectual property, which is a whole separate conversation, or it's just simply the rates that are published on your website for plane tickets, or mortgage rates, or things that competition would traditionally nefariously scrape and then be able to undercut. Well, it's still an agentic problem as well. It's not just a old internet problem. So there's also the notion of how do you protect the data that you want to monetize, even if it doesn't need to be discoverable. And we see that as a specific use case as well that we're helping clients with today. So it's kind of across that whole spectrum.
So let me read that back so I understand. So you're not just like saying, okay, your ChatGPT bot, come on in, you can have the whole site. You're getting very granular and saying there's parts of the site you could cordon off if you wanted to, and maybe even parts of a page.
That's right. The parts of page and specific components. And that's where that really leads to, as you build this layer of trust. It starts with visibility. Who's touching me? Going back to that intent, what are they doing when they touch me? And what are they trying to create? And then the next piece is, great, now that I have the visibility, how do I control it? And so putting kind of group-based policies in place categorically, I don't want to do this or that, I don't want to see this or that, but then in a more fine-grained way, maybe it gets down to the specific component of a page or a data field. So going group policy, fine-grained policy, leading to trust that ultimately starts with overall visibility. How do I know what my traffic is?
Yeah. Is that usually how you deploy it? You go through a monitor reporting phase where you're like, look, 8,000 people are just hammering this one page to get the price.
That's right. That's right.
And
Exactly.
here's like a pie chart of who they are. And then the customer says, okay, I want to turn off this, that, the other, and this, that. And is that kind of how it works? They kind of get a read on it and then they start pruning it down.
Yeah, quite literally, it's a traditional user interface where you've got a characterization of all your traffic. It's broken down by here's what bots look like, here's what agentic looks like, and now let's start to apply policies against it.
This is kind of an in the weeds question, but we get in the weeds here. So Google's confusing because they kind of have a lot going on, right? So you've got the traditional Google bot, you've got Google Shopping, which uses the Google bot, but you can also send it a feed, and then then now they have AI overviews. So Gemini powers all this. And I actually don't know. Does it? I doubt it has a separate bot. It probably just uses. Do you know? Does it use just standard Google bot for the training data? And can you, like, let's say I said to you, I don't want any of the Google AI stuff to touch my site, but core Google is fine. Like traditional Google search is fine. Is that? I don't even know if that's like split outable on the Google side or not.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah, me either. Yeah. I'm not sure why anyone would even want to do that, but I was just always curious. Like, the other ones are so clear on. We have a bot for these things, and then therefore at the the meta level, you can punch out the de-whitelist or not whitelist the ones you don't want. But it seems like Google's like, we've got this giant straw, and everything's going through this one straw. So interesting. All right. Do you guys get involved in what other, so I've read a bunch of your content that talks about agentic readiness. And when we talk about that, we're talking about your product catalog and, the amount of content and context. What do you guys mean by agentic readiness?
So it starts, I think, with visibility. As I've talked about, understand your surface area of risk, understand your surface area of opportunity. Once you can catalog that, then it's build your profile around what you need to establish for trust. And by the way, we're talking about this a lot at the latter stages of kind of an agentic transactional relationship in e-commerce. But this is exactly the same paradigm that we apply to looking at ad traffic as well. So being able to very clearly articulate that your expected behaviors in your ad traffic are verifiable is another application that we do here as well. So it's not just on the transactional side of it.
In the ad world, do you get involved with the buyer of the ad where you say, look, this percentage of views or clicks we think were not true. You need to go back to do you get involved in that discussion?
Quite literally. So we'll get involved in historically, particularly pre and post bid invalid traffic determination. And then we also do viewability, brand safety, other verification kinds of scenarios. And then we also do click defense scenarios to start to contemplate actual clicking behaviors and determine the validity of those clicks as well.
Okay. I think I took a little side journey there when we were talking about the bad bots and some of the things. Were there any more that you were going to list off that I interrupted?
I think we've circled through most of it.
This may be something you can't answer, but like in my mind, it probably starts as just like, kind of shady actors, like some entrepreneur trying to do something to get some data. And then it starts to progressively get more aggressive to nation states. Like a lot of the cybersecurity people, I see the penetration people talk a lot on CNBC that, some high percentage of what they see is other nation states trying to impact our infrastructure and just be disruptive. Do you guys get involved in that whole world, given that you're Air Force, maybe that's, and if you don't even want to talk about that, I understand.
No, look, we don't directly focus on that part of the world, but I mean, suffice to say, it's a really simple notion that all the bot activity that we're discussing here, it's just simply automation, right? It's automation of connections, and those connections get a certain amount of scale when you take the human out of the loop. So
even for bad actors. So if you're a manual bad actor, you're soon going to be an automated manual bad actor. So
I think that's a huge part of it. I think the other part of it is that there's an increasing reduction in the barriers to entry to be able to do this because of the automation component and because of professionalization of the availability of these kinds of things to be readily used by an individual. A nascent, skilled individual can create an outsized impact. And that outsized impact is then just scaled exponentially when you start to talk about the use of these tools. So what it really means is that these basic notions that we have around nation states are sophisticated, individuals are not as sophisticated, and they have a different volume of activity that could be created and impact that could be created, that's just all going away. Those barriers to entries just don't exist any longer. And I'll go a step further. It really boils down to intent. A bad guy might want to monetize something. A bad nation state might want to steal something, get some information. Somebody who has a social cause that they're driving may just want to be able to proliferate a message. So the intent changes the attack profile, but what doesn't change is the ability to scale through automation.
This whole intent thing is very fascinating to me. Must be it's like hard to Sherlock Holmes all that out, but I'm sure you guys have figured it out. The in our last 5 minutes or so, we've kind of talked about today backwards. Let's talk about today forwards. Do you spend time thinking about what does this future look like? So you're already starting to see these crazy numbers, 1,300%. Is that going to be like 5,000% next year? Or you kind of hinted there's like, you got to take the human friction element into it, and folks like yourself are part of the tool set to put some friction in here. Do you see this actually? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you say nope. We're going to clamp down on this, and it's going to go back the other way. It'll be 90% human traffic over time. So what's your any forecasting or trends you can think are going to happen going forward?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, there's no way this train gets derailed. It's going to continue rolling down the tracks, and it's going to pick up speed as it goes. I think it's an inevitability at this point, but it's an inevitability for a slightly different reason than we think about. I think that AI has gotten into the public conscience very recently, and in an increasingly fast pace because of the amazingly rapid introduction of generative AI into our environment. I think I heard the other day that OpenAI is the fastest adopted consumer product in the history of mankind, right? And so it leapt into our public conscious and understanding. But the notion of generative AI wasn't even a thing in January of this year. And now it's something that everybody in your audience is talking about and planning for. They haven't quite figured out what budgets they have to apply to it, what problem it's going to solve or create, but they know they have to do it. But the reality is that this AI movement didn't start with generative AI. It goes well before that. I would argue it goes back decades into machine learning and to data science and these other things that all led to this idea that machines, it turns out, can actually move faster than the human brain and make connections that are more complex than the human brain. Now, how do we optimize our data? How do we organize our data? How do we process our data to be able to enable that to happen? Where things are really taking off now after decades of learning and building is that anybody can interface with it. So you don't need to be a data scientist to be able to go in and manipulate 20 trillion digital interactions anymore. But what you do need to do is be able to have the logic to be able to store a query and use that data to create a three-dimensional picture that makes sense. And then to apply it to an automation that you have a level of trust associated with. Those notions of the trust and the protocols that, as you picked up on, I think that's where the friction comes right now. But those are rapidly going to be broken down because everybody in the technology world is looking at this and trying to figure it out. And as soon as those walls come down, it's going to be adopted even faster. I think it's an inevitability. The second point that I would make sure to think about, I think Google has been doing a great job of talking about this as they opened up their new protocol, is that the entire internet is predicated on this idea, or the control environment in the internet is predicated on this idea that there's a human being on the other side of a computer screen, Well, in the new agentic world, that's just simply not going to be the case. It's really going to be one agent talking to another agent, both with some level of authority and autonomy that's been granted to them by a human. But that human is going to be at arm's length from that relationship now. So whereas you and I know who we are and we have a true identity, and that true identity takes on verifiable credentials in a digital form, that's going to very rapidly have a layer of abstraction that we don't have today. So all of the paradigms that we understand about the control environment are simply going to have to shift. And as they shift, that's going to be the other natural friction point that will slowly be removed, which will accelerate the adoption here.
Yeah. I just hope I can get out of this world where I have to do 18 two-factor authentications a day and look at some authenticator app 50 other times. So here's my agents. I trust them, and then I can just like not have to log in again. Well, we'll see. We're counting on. Come back in a year. I want you got to solve that for us, Stu. We're counting on you.
All over it.
Think of the GDP loss from all the two-factor authentication going on. It's got to be 5% or something. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Stu. I learned a ton from this conversation. I'm gonna have to go take a nap now. My head hurts from all the information that we've jammed in there. If folks want to, you guys put out a lot of great content. Where can they go to find the content that either you or the company produces?
Yeah, our company is rather prolific in social media. Please find us, particularly on LinkedIn. You can follow us there. We publish a couple of things a day, frankly. Also, humansecurity.com is our website. And it's got a wonderful section with all of the different content that we develop, everything from webinars to white papers to research papers. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that we have a sub-brand in our organization called Satori. And Satori is our intelligence team that's constantly looking at and developing data based on observables and linking that back to all kinds of unique campaigns and activities that are out there. Some really, really amazing work that team does.
Yeah, and that's like for more like security nerds, or
no, it runs the gamut. In fact, they've been part of some really interesting and prolific takedowns of supply chain compromises of Android devices, as an example, under something that we call Bad Box and Bad Box 2. There's more to come on that, by the way. And we recently did a thing around slop ads, which was really looking at compromises inside of application stores that were being compromised right up front to be able to trick individuals into downloading and then compromising from there, all the way to more traditional security scenarios. So some really, really amazing work that team does that's worth looking into.
Very cool. Well, thanks for coming on the pod. Congrats to you and the team at Human for, seems like you're in the perfect place at the perfect time. So congrats on that. It's like, wow, I wish someone had software for helping me figure out what all this agent traffic is, and bloop, that you're right there at the right time. Congrats on that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and thrilled to be able to represent the amazing folks in my company. So thank you.
Follow, rate, and share to stay up to date with Retailgentic, your guide to the future of AI shopping agents.